if I had to bet, I think Kamala Harris will win comfortably.
In particular, how important you think technology, and specifically AI, which we've been discussing today, is going to be in terms of growth for the UK economy and capital investment?
Well, I think AI is going to be critical because the big problem the UK has is productivity. In other words, how much we produce per person. And productivity has not been growing properly in the UK. And AI is the answer to that. AI allows each individual to do far, far more than they were able to before. And it will fix not just problems in business, it will fix huge problems like the NHS, where demand massively exceeds supply. So, yes, investment critical to that, but also government regulation, because, as you can imagine, a lot of the public are very frightened of AI. There'll be a lot of people working in these industries who will feel very threatened by AI coming in and challenging their jobs. So it's about government thinking about how does it get the investment in, but how does it also allow people to use these technologies and sometimes even force them to use them when they don't want to.
And do you think this government, the new government, gets AI? I mean, I know you've been critical of Rishi Sunak in the past, but I sense that you were quite pro what he was doing around AI. He understood the technology. Do you get the same sense from Keir Starmer?
I don't yet, no. I think there were flaws with Rishi Sunak, but he was genuinely somebody very, very comfortable in Silicon Valley, partly to do with his professional career, very excited by technology, very close to a lot of the big technology innovators. And given the problems that Keir Starmer's facing, I'd like to see some of those ideas. And in general, more intellectual curiosity. But, you know, I feel the kind of things that technology companies are offering must be vital to the UK's development.
And you spoke in today's session here at the IBM Think 2024 event about the importance of communication from a political point of view, particularly when people have often legitimate fears about AI. Can you just expand a bit on that and what you think politicians should be saying when it comes to AI?
Well, let's try to take a concrete example. Let's say that the large language models, things like ChatGPT, were beginning to get good enough for them to answer more reliably than a medical professional many basic medical questions, and do so quite patiently and empathetically. And debate about whether that's true or not, but let's imagine it's true. Now think about how frightened the public would be about thinking that what they were doing is talking to a computer instead of a human. Think about how threatened people who've spent 7-8 years of their life studying a medical degree would be by the idea that they were being replaced by a computer. So, if a government found the evidence that it was true that these things were quite reliable, and you could have the same argument about, driverless tube trains or autonomous vehicles, which also turn out, if you look at the stats, to be more reliable than human-driven things. How do you convince the public of it? Because if you don't get the messaging right from the beginning, you can imagine other political parties immediately putting out scare stories, you're being hammered on social media, at which point the government panics and they put all the developments back 3 to 5 years.
So what should they be saying then, I suppose? Because if the public do have those fears, how do you communicate that?
Well, I think you have to firstly have very, very credible people. And a lot of this is about the public themselves interacting with this technology more. To become comfortable with the power of ChatGPT, people need to use the best models of ChatGPT more and see what it's capable of doing. I think you also need to talk about regulation. You need to talk about what you're putting in place to protect people and how it protects people. And probably in the transition period, you need to describe it as a digital assistant, as something that's sitting alongside a human rather than replacing a human.
And on regulation, I mean, how do you draft legislation, say, that is appropriate? Because if you come up with a bill today, it's probably going to be out of date in 6 months' time.
Yeah, it's not primarily about legislation. I think it's probably better about smart regulators who are able to adapt very, very quickly, because you're completely right. What we're worried about today, 5 years' time, will turn out to be complete madness. I mean, the people who built canals in Britain believed that the arrival of stagecoaches was going to lead to a complete moral collapse of society. It turned out that wasn't the problem around stagecoaches at all. The problem turned out to be horse poo, right? So we really struggle to predict what these things are going to be able to do in 5 years' time. My guess is they're going to completely change our world. They're going to be far more powerful than we're beginning to imagine. But if that's the case, we're only seeing 0.5% of it now. And
what about people, and you touched on this briefly in your talk earlier, about people have existential worries about humanity with AI. Is that scaremongering, or is that a legitimate fear?
completely legitimate. Completely legitimate. I mean, Demis Hassabis, who just got a Nobel Prize, who's one of the smartest people in the universe, believes there will be artificial general intelligence within 5 to 10 years. Artificial general intelligence is essentially smarter than you or I. And for humans to really confront something that is autonomous and capable of thinking much more powerfully than us totally changes the nature of human existence. It's like encountering, I'm afraid, a god, in a way. I mean, it doesn't have all the aspects of a god, but many aspects of a god. And therefore that will change the meaning of our life, the purpose of our life, the activities of our life in ways that we can't begin to predict.
And where does education come in? Because, we now have phrases we're using now that 2 years ago most people wouldn't have known. Closed versus open source, AI, large language models. How important is it that everyday people understand what that is?
I think vital, really vital, and creating the time for people to explore and engage. I mean, it's astonishing. I mean, the latest models of ChatGPT have been out for a couple of years now, and yet the vast majority of people I meet haven't begun to use them. And when I begin to show them what they're capable of, they get very scared. They're very sort of find it very uneasy, right? A lot of very smart people haven't begun to use them. I reckon maybe half of 1% of people in this country begin to understand what's already here. So that's a massive job in education.
Are you an AI optimist?
I believe that AI is going to be astonishingly powerful and competent beyond our imaginings in 5 years, but the creation of a superintelligence by nature, like actually the last superintelligence, which was us, which was humans arriving on Earth, carries with it immense potential for good and harm. And we have to be realistic about that. The cat is out of the bag. So I don't think optimism or pessimism is quite right. I think it's about power and about how you deal with power and how you deal with a power that you can't now ignore.
And just finally, I wanted to ask you about something you put on Twitter the other day about the US election. We're 3 weeks away, and it was interesting you said you think Kamala Harris is in a stronger position than maybe a lot of people think. Why is that?
I may well be proved completely wrong, and making a prediction on the US elections 3 weeks out is a real way to humiliate myself. But yeah, here it is. If I had to bet, I think Kamala Harris will win comfortably. And the reason for that is I think the polls and the polling companies, their data is no good. Their business model is collapsing, partly because most people are not responding to their polls in the way that they want. And so what they've done is they've got frightened by the fact they failed to predict it in 2016. They've added a percentage to Trump's vote to try to reinforce themselves. And they're sticking together as a herd because none of them want to stick their head up. And none of them want to be like probably what I'll be in 3 weeks' time, somebody who predicted a Kamala Harris victory and got it wrong. So I think the chances are she'll win comfortably, and it'll turn out the reason we didn't predict it is the polling companies didn't have enough of the right kind of data and added too much to Trump's vote.
Rory Stewart, thank you so much.
Thank you again.